When I showed up to my promotion party, my wife announced to everyone. When I walked into the conference room at Meridian Financial and saw the banner reading, "Congratulations, Director of Operations," my wife Olivia stood up from her seat at the head table and tapped her champagne glass with a fork. The room went quiet, and she smiled at me with that expression I'd learned to recognize over 8 years of marriage, the one that looked warm to everyone else but had ice underneath. She cleared her throat and said loud enough for all 30 people to hear, "Before we celebrate my husband's big promotion, I think everyone should know the real story of how he got here." I froze halfway through the door with my hand still on the handle. My boss, Richard Landry, was sitting at the table looking confused. My co-workers filled the other seats, some holding drinks, others plates of catered food. The banner swayed slightly in the air conditioning. Olivia's parents sat next to her, and her father was already smiling like he knew what was coming. I'd been running late because I'd stopped to pick up the watch I'd ordered for myself as a celebration gift. A Seiko I'd saved up for over 6 months, buying it with money from my separate checking account that I'd opened quietly 3 months ago. The box was still in my jacket pocket, and I could feel its weight against my ribs. Olivia continued, her voice carrying across the room. "My husband didn't earn this promotion through his work performance. He got it because my father owns 40% of this company's shares, and I made it very clear to the board that promoting him was a condition of our continued investment." She paused and looked around the room to make sure everyone was listening. "I've been managing his career since the day we met. Every position, every raise, every opportunity came because I asked for it. And now, he gets to be Director of Operations at 32 years old, not because he deserves it, but because I decided he deserves it." The room was completely silent. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. Richard's face had gone pale, and he was staring at Olivia like she'd just announced she was from another planet. I felt my legs go numb, and I had to grab the doorframe to stay standing. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Olivia raised her glass toward me and smiled bigger. "So let's all toast to my husband, the man who owes everything he has to me. Congratulations, sweetheart. You've earned exactly nothing." I'd been working at Meridian Financial for 6 years when Olivia and I met at a company fundraising gala. She was there as a guest of the CEO, introduced as the daughter of one of the firm's major investors. I was a junior analyst at the time, barely making $50,000 a year, sharing an apartment with a roommate to afford rent in the city. Olivia was beautiful and confident, and when she started talking to me at the bar, I felt like I'd won some kind of lottery. She asked about my work, seemed genuinely interested in my analysis of market trends, and gave me her number before the night ended. Our first date was at an expensive steakhouse that I couldn't really afford, but I'd wanted to impress her. She ordered wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget and insisted on splitting the check, which I appreciated because my credit card was getting close to its limit. We dated for 8 months before she proposed to me. Yes, she proposed. She'd planned an elaborate surprise at the botanical gardens with a photographer and everything. The ring was platinum and expensive, and when she slid it onto my finger, she said she wanted to take care of me forever. I was 24 and thought I'd found someone who loved me for who I was. The wedding was massive, paid for entirely by her family, held at a resort that cost more than my entire year's salary. Her father, Gregory Ashford, gave a speech about welcoming me to the family and said something about how Olivia always knew what she wanted and always got it. I thought it was sweet at the time. The first promotion came 3 months after we got married. I was called into Richard's office, and he told me they were moving me from junior analyst to senior analyst with a $20,000 raise. I was shocked because I'd only been at the company for 2 years, and usually that jump took 4 or 5. Richard seemed uncomfortable during the conversation, kept adjusting his tie and wouldn't make eye contact. He said the board had been impressed with my work and wanted to see me advance. I went home and told Olivia, and she hugged me and said she always knew I was capable of great things. I took her out to dinner to celebrate, though she picked the restaurant and made the reservation before I even suggested it. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. The second promotion came a year later, senior analyst to team lead, another $30,000 added to my salary. By this point, I was making more money than I'd ever imagined, and Olivia had convinced me to move into a house her parents owned in an expensive suburb. She said they were giving us a deal on rent, only $2,000 a month for a 4-bedroom place that should have cost $5,000. I felt grateful and a little uncomfortable about accepting charity, but Olivia said family helped family. She'd also taken over our finances completely by then, setting up a joint account where both our paychecks went. She said it was easier to manage everything in one place, and I agreed because I'd never been good with budgets or planning. She gave me a credit card attached to the joint account and said to use it for whatever I needed. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I missed. How Olivia always knew about promotions before they were announced to me. How she'd tell me what to wear to important meetings and coach me on what to say to executives. How she'd review my presentations the night before and rewrite sections she didn't like. How she'd remind me constantly that her father's investment in Meridian was the reason the company stayed solvent during market downturns. She'd say it casually, like mentioning the weather, but always in a way that made me understand the implication. Our comfort, our lifestyle, our future depended on her family's money and influence. I tried to contribute in my own ways, I worked 60-hour weeks trying to prove I deserved my position. I'd stay late analyzing data and preparing reports, making sure my team's numbers were always accurate and on time. I built good relationships with clients and brought in 3 major accounts over 4 years. But every time I achieved something, Olivia would smile and say something like, "See? I knew putting you in that position was the right choice." Or, "Dad's contacts really helped you land that client, didn't they?" She had a way of taking credit without explicitly claiming it, making me feel simultaneously proud and inadequate. The control expanded into other areas slowly. She started commenting on my clothes, saying the suits I bought weren't professional enough. She took me shopping and picked out everything, using the joint account to pay for designer labels I would never have chosen for myself. She critiqued my haircut and made appointments with her stylist without asking. She planned our social calendar, accepting or declining invitations on my behalf. When I mentioned wanting to visit my parents one weekend, she'd already scheduled us for a dinner party at her colleague's house. When I suggested we take a vacation somewhere I wanted to go, she'd book flights to a resort her parents recommended instead. Money became another tool. I made good money, but I never saw it. Everything went into the joint account, and Olivia managed all the bills and expenses. She'd show me spreadsheets sometimes, pointing out how much we were saving, how well she was investing our money, how smart she was with finances. I'd nod along and feel grateful that she was so capable. When I wanted to buy something for myself, I'd use the credit card she'd given me, not realizing until much later that she reviewed every transaction. She never said no directly, but she'd make comments. "Do you really need another video game? That's expensive for a watch you'll barely wear. I thought we agreed you were trying to be more financially responsible." I started to feel like a child asking permission from a parent. But Olivia framed it as partnership, as her looking out for us, as her being the responsible one while I focused on my career. And my career was going well, at least on paper. The third promotion came when I was 29, team lead to assistant director. Another $40,000 added to my salary. I was making over $160,000 a year, living in a beautiful house, married to a gorgeous woman who seemed to have everything planned perfectly. From the outside, I had achieved the American dream, but inside, I felt hollow. I'd wake up some mornings and look at myself in the mirror and not recognize who I was looking at. The suits Olivia picked, the haircut she approved, the job title I wasn't sure I'd earned. I'd go to work and sit in my office and wonder if my co-workers respected me or just tolerated me because of who my wife's father was. I'd present at meetings and second-guess every word, wondering if people were listening to my ideas or just nodding along to keep Gregory Ashford's daughter happy. I'd close deals and feel proud for maybe an hour before Olivia would mention how her father's recommendation had opened the door. The breaking point started small, like these things always do. I'd been having lunch with a co-worker named Kevin Frost, one of the few people at Meridian who'd been hired around the same time as me. We'd started together as junior analysts, but while I'd climbed to assistant director, Kevin was still a senior analyst. He was better at the job than I was, smarter with numbers, more creative with strategy. Over sandwiches one afternoon, he mentioned he'd applied for a team lead position that had opened up. I encouraged him, said he'd be perfect for it. He laughed and said, "Yeah, but I don't have your connections." He said it without malice, just stating a fact. Then he asked me directly, "Is it true your wife's family basically runs this place?" I wanted to defend myself, to say I'd earned my positions through hard work and skill, but the words stuck in my throat because I didn't know if they were true. I told Kevin I'd worked hard and he said he knew that, said everyone knew I put in the hours, but he also said everyone knew about the Ashford influence. It wasn't gossip, it was just understood. The company needed Gregory's investment to stay competitive, and Olivia made sure everyone knew she was Gregory's only child and heir. Kevin didn't say it meanly, but the implication was clear. My success was conditional, dependent, bought and paid for by my wife's family money. That conversation planted something in my head that started growing. I began paying attention to things I'd been ignoring, how quiet rooms got when I walked in, how carefully people phrased their disagreements with my ideas, how Richard always checked with Olivia before making decisions about my department. I started noticing Olivia's comments more clearly, how she positioned herself as the architect of my career. "I told Richard you were ready for more responsibility. I convinced the board you could handle this. Dad agreed to increase his investment if they gave you that promotion." I decided to test something. I started looking for jobs at other companies, places where the Ashford name meant nothing. I updated my resume and sent out applications to 3 different firms. All 3 invited me for interviews based on my experience and performance metrics. I didn't tell Olivia about any of it. The interviews went well, and one company, a smaller investment firm called Horizon Capital, offered me a position as director of analytics. The title was actually lower than assistant director, but the role was bigger, more independent. The salary was competitive, only $10,000 less than what I currently made. I would be building a department from scratch, hiring my own team, making real decisions without someone else's money hanging over every choice. I sat with that offer letter for 3 days before I told Olivia. We were having dinner at home, a meal she'd prepared because she'd decided I needed to eat healthier and had taken over menu planning. I waited until we were done eating, and then I told her about Horizon Capital. I explained the position and the opportunity and how I thought it might be good for my career to prove myself somewhere new. Olivia listened with her fork halfway to her mouth, and then she put it down carefully on her plate. She asked me if I was serious, and I said yes. She asked if I understood what I was throwing away, and I said I wasn't throwing anything away, just exploring options. She stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen counter where her purse sat. She pulled out her phone and made a call right there in front of me. I heard her say, "Daddy, we need to talk about something." She put the phone on speaker. Gregory's voice filled the kitchen asking what was wrong. Olivia told him I'd received a job offer from another company and was considering leaving Meridian. There was a pause, and then Gregory laughed. He actually laughed and said, "Let me make a call." 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Richard Landry, calling me at 8:30 on a weeknight. He said he'd just heard I might be considering other opportunities, and he wanted to let me know that the board had been discussing creating a new director of operations position. They'd been planning to announce it next month, but given the circumstances, he wanted me to know I was their first choice for the role. The position came with a $70,000 raise and a significant increase in responsibility. Richard said they valued my contribution to Meridian and hoped I'd stay with the company family. I hung up the phone and looked at Olivia. She smiled and said, "See, they know your worth." But I knew what had really happened. Gregory had made one phone call, and suddenly a new position materialized with my name on it. A position that maybe existed, maybe didn't, but definitely got fast-tracked because Olivia's father demanded it. I asked Olivia if she'd planned this, and she said she didn't plan anything. She just made sure I got what I deserved. When I pressed her on what that meant, she said I was being ungrateful, and walked out of the room. I turned down the Horizon Capital offer the next day, and accepted the Director of Operations position at Meridian. I told myself I was making the smart choice, taking the better title and more money. But really, I was scared. Scared of what would happen if I left. Scared that Olivia was right and I couldn't succeed without her family's influence. Scared that I'd fail at Horizon and prove I was exactly as dependent as I felt. So I stayed, and I hated myself a little bit more for it. The promotion party was Olivia's idea, of course. She said we should celebrate properly, that this was a major milestone in my career. She organized everything, sent the invitations, booked the conference room at Meridian, ordered catering, designed the banner. I didn't object because I never objected to anything anymore. I just let Olivia manage things because that's what our marriage had become. Her managing, me complying, both of us pretending this was normal. Standing in that conference room doorway listening to her speech, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was humiliation finally outweighing fear. Maybe it was rage finally breaking through years of careful suppression. Maybe it was just clarity, the sudden understanding that this wasn't going to get better, and I couldn't keep living like this. Whatever it was, it unlocked something in my throat, and I heard myself say, "That's not true." Olivia stopped mid-sip of her champagne and looked at me. "Excuse me? That's not true," I said again, louder this time. My legs had stopped shaking, and I walked further into the room. Every eye was on me. I've worked 60-hour weeks for 6 years. I've brought in major clients. I've built teams and strategies and systems that made this company money. I earned my promotions. Olivia laughed, and it was not a kind sound. "Sweetheart, you're embarrassing yourself. Everyone here knows the truth." She gestured around the room. "Should we take a vote? Who thinks my husband got here on his own merit?" No one moved. No one raised their hands, but no one spoke either. They just sat there looking uncomfortable, staring at their plates or their drinks or the floor. Olivia nodded like their silence proved her point. "See? Everyone knows. The only person who didn't seem to know was you." Richard finally stood up. He cleared his throat and said, "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Why?" Olivia turned to him. "Are you worried about protecting his feelings?" He should have been worried about that before trying to leave for Horizon Capital. "Did he tell you about that, Richard? How he interviewed behind my back, was ready to throw away everything this company invested in him?" She looked back at me. "Everything I invested in you?" I felt my face get hot. "I told you about Horizon in private. You had no right to—" "I have every right!" Olivia's voice went sharp. "Do you understand how much money my family has poured into keeping you comfortable? This house, this job, this life? You'd be nothing without us. A junior analyst sharing an apartment, shopping at discount stores, eating ramen for dinner. I lifted you up, and this is how you repay me? By trying to sneak away to some no-name firm? I wanted to see if I could succeed on my own," I said quietly. "And you can't," Olivia said flatly. "That's what you don't want to accept. You're not special. You're not brilliant. You're mediocre at best, and the only reason you've gotten anywhere is because I made it happen. So yes, I organized this party. Yes, I wanted everyone here to understand exactly how things work, because you needed a reminder of who you owe." Something in me cracked then. Not broke, cracked, like ice starting to fracture. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the watch box. I set it on the table in front of me. "I bought this with my own money," I said. "From an account you don't control. I've been saving for 6 months because I wanted to buy myself something without asking permission." Olivia stared at the box like it was a snake. "What account?" "I opened a checking account 3 months ago. I have my paycheck split, 20% into that account. It's mine. You can't see it or access it or take it away. I'd done it after the Horizon Capital situation, opening the account at a bank across town, setting up direct deposit through HR during my lunch break. It wasn't much money, maybe $4,000 saved up so far, but it was mine. The watch had cost $800, and I'd paid for it in cash because I wanted the transaction to be completely separate from anything Olivia could track. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. Her face went through several expressions quickly. Shock, anger, calculation. She turned to her father. Did you hear this? He's been hiding money. Gregory Ashford stood up slowly. He was a tall man, well-dressed, with gray hair and the kind of face that was used to being listened to. Son, he said, and I hated that he called me that. I think you're forgetting yourself. This promotion, this career, all of it exists because of the relationship between our families. You signed on to this arrangement when you married my daughter. I married Olivia because I loved her, I said, not because I wanted to be bought. Love, Olivia said mockingly. You loved the nice dinners and the expensive gifts and the house you couldn't afford. You loved the status and the title and the money. Don't pretend you're some victim. You enjoyed every benefit of being connected to my family. I worked for those benefits, I said, and my voice was shaking now. I earned my keep. I did my job well, and I did it honestly. You did it under my protection? Olivia shot back. Do you think Richard would have promoted you without me talking to the board? Do you think clients would have met with you without Dad's introduction? You've been playing dress-up in a career I built for you, and now you want to act like you're some kind of self-made man? She walked closer to me, and I could smell her perfume. You're pathetic, and everyone in this room knows it. I looked around at my co-workers. Some were staring at their laps. Others looked angry, but I couldn't tell if they were angry at me or at Olivia. Kevin was watching me with something like pity in his eyes. Richard had sat back down and was rubbing his temples. No one was defending me, but no one was agreeing with Olivia either. They were just witnessing this public destruction of whatever dignity I had left. I picked up the watch box and put it back in my pocket. Then I looked at Olivia and said, I want a divorce. The room somehow got quieter. Olivia's face went blank. What did you say? I want a divorce, I repeated. My hands were shaking so badly I had to shove them in my pockets. I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this. Olivia laughed again, that same cruel sound. You can't afford a divorce. You can't afford anything without me. She pulled out her phone. Let me show you what happens when you defy me. She pulled up our bank account on her screen and turned it toward me. I saw the balance. $230,000 in savings, $15,000 in checking. Then I watched her fingers move, transferring money to another account, moving it, draining it, until the balance showed $5,000 in savings and $200 in checking. There, she said. That's what you get to keep. The rest is mine. Try divorcing me with that. That's illegal, I said. That's marital property. Prove it, Olivia smiled. My father's lawyers are very good. By the time they're done, you won't have enough money for a bus ticket, let alone a lawyer. She looked at Gregory. Isn't that right, Daddy? Gregory nodded. We protect what's ours. I stood there trying to process what was happening. My wife had just stolen our savings in front of 30 witnesses. My father-in-law had just threatened me financially. My boss was watching this happen and doing nothing. I was standing in a conference room under a banner celebrating a promotion I apparently hadn't earned, wearing a suit I didn't pick, holding a watch that represented the only money I had that was truly mine. I felt lightheaded. You can't do this, I said, and I hated how weak I sounded. I already did, Olivia said. She turned to the room. Party's over. Everyone can go home. People started standing up, gathering their things, avoiding eye contact with me as they filed out. Kevin walked past and squeezed my shoulder briefly, but he didn't say anything. Within 5 minutes, the conference room was empty, except for me, Olivia, and her parents. Richard had disappeared somewhere, probably to his office to update his resume because this whole mess was going to come back on him eventually. Olivia walked to the door, then turned back. You'll be out of the house by tomorrow. I'm changing the locks tonight. You can't kick me out of our house, I said. It's not our house, Olivia said. It's my parents' house. You've been renting from them, remember? And they're terminating your lease effective immediately. She looked at Gregory, who nodded confirmation. You have until 8 tomorrow morning to get your things. After that, anything left behind becomes my property. This is insane, I said. You can't just... I can do whatever I want, Olivia interrupted. That's what you never understood. I have the money, the connections, the power. You have nothing. You are nothing. And now everyone knows it. She walked out, and her parents followed. I was left alone in the conference room with half-eaten catered food and a banner mocking me from the wall. I drove home in a daze, my hands barely functioning on the steering wheel. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Olivia had obviously told people to cut me off because text messages started flooding in. My credit cards were declined. My access to our streaming services was revoked. She'd changed the Wi-Fi password. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I'd been systematically locked out of every shared account and service we had. The front door was still accessible, but I knew that wouldn't last. I went inside and started grabbing things. Clothes, documents, whatever I could fit in the 2 suitcases I'd brought from my old apartment 8 years ago. I found my birth certificate and social security card in a filing cabinet in the home office. I grabbed my passport and my college diplomas. I took photos of everything in the house with my phone, documenting what was there, what belonged to me originally, what I'd bought with my own money. I found old tax returns that showed my income and Olivia's separate. I photographed the lease agreement for the house that I'd signed, showing I was a legal tenant. I backed everything up to a cloud storage account that I created with a new email address Olivia didn't know about. By midnight, I'd packed what I could and was sitting on the edge of the bed trying to figure out where to go. My parents lived in another state, and I couldn't face calling them to explain what had happened. I had friends from college, but I hadn't talked to most of them in years because Olivia had slowly isolated me from anyone who wasn't connected to her world. I pulled out my phone and looked at my contacts list, and there were so few people I could actually call. I'd let my entire support system dissolve while I was busy being grateful for a life someone else had built for me. I ended up at a hotel off the highway, paying for one night with the credit card attached to my secret account. The room was small and smelled like cleaning chemicals, but it was mine. No one could lock me out or take it away. I lay on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. My wife had publicly humiliated me, stolen our savings, kicked me out of our house, and destroyed any illusion I had about my career being legitimate. I had 2 suitcases, $4,000, and a watch I'd bought to celebrate a promotion I hadn't really earned. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not one of the expensive ones in the city, because I couldn't afford that. I found someone through an online search, a solo practitioner named Angela Torres, who specialized in divorce cases. Her office was above a bakery in a strip mall, and her waiting room had mismatched chairs and old magazines. She saw me immediately because her 11 o'clock had canceled. I sat across from her desk and told her everything. The marriage, the control, the promotions, the party, the money transfer, the eviction. Angela listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she sat back and said, "Your wife committed theft." I blinked. "What?" "The money transfer," Angela explained. "Marital assets can't be unilaterally taken without a court order. What she did was theft. We can file an emergency motion to freeze the accounts and get your money back." She tapped her pen on the pad. "But that's not your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is your job." "I know," I said. "She probably got me fired by now." "No," Angela said. "Your problem is that you have to decide if you want to keep it. Because if you stay at Meridian, you're staying under the Ashford family's control. They'll use your job as leverage in the divorce. They'll make your life hell until you quit, and then they'll blame you for being unemployed. You need to leave that job if you want any chance at independence." I sat there processing that. Leaving Meridian meant losing my salary, my title, my entire professional identity. It meant starting over at a different company, probably at a lower position, definitely at lower pay. But Angela was right. As long as I worked there, Gregory and Olivia could manipulate everything. They could tank my performance reviews, block my projects, poison my relationships with coworkers. They could make me fail to prove I'd always needed them. "What if I can't find another job?" I asked. "Then you find something temporary while you look," Angela said. "Retail, food service, whatever pays the bills. Pride won't help you in a divorce court. Money and documentation will." She explained her fee structure, which was reasonable but still more than I wanted to spend. I agreed to pay her retainer from my secret account, and she said she'd file the emergency motion that afternoon. I left her office feeling marginally better, at least like I had a plan beyond sitting in a hotel room panicking. I drove back to the house around 2 in the afternoon, hoping to grab a few more things before Olivia changed the locks. Her car was in the driveway, along with a locksmith's van. I parked on the street and watched as a man changed out the deadbolt on the front door. Olivia stood on the porch supervising, and when she saw my car, she waved mockingly. I wanted to get out and confront her, but Angela's words echoed in my head. "Document everything. Don't give her ammunition." So I pulled out my phone and started recording video. Olivia talking to the locksmith, the old deadbolt being removed, the new one being installed, the locksmith handing Olivia the keys. I recorded for 5 minutes until they went back inside, and then I drove away. I spent the next 3 days in the hotel room applying for jobs. I updated my resume, removing any references to the Ashford family connections. I applied to 15 companies, ranging from major investment firms to small financial consultancies. I got rejection emails from 3, automated responses from 8, and silence from the rest. On the 4th day, Kevin called me. He said Richard had called an emergency department meeting and announced that I'd resigned effective immediately due to personal reasons. The director of operations position was being eliminated, and my responsibilities were being redistributed among existing staff. Kevin said people were shocked, but not surprised. Then he asked if I was okay, and I didn't know how to answer that, so I said I was managing. He told me to call if I needed anything, and I said thanks, even though I knew I wouldn't. Angela called me on day 5 with news. The emergency motion had been granted. The judge ordered all marital accounts frozen and required both parties to disclose all assets within 2 weeks. Olivia would have to return the $225,000 she'd transferred or explain to the court where it went. Angela sounded pleased. She said this was a good start and that Olivia's lawyer would likely contact us soon to discuss settlement. I asked what kind of settlement I could expect, and Angela said realistically, we'd split everything 50-50, including debt. The house wasn't mine, so I wouldn't get anything from that. But bank accounts, investments, retirement funds, all of that would be divided equally. Olivia's lawyer called the next day. His name was Thomas Kingsley, and he had a voice that sounded like expensive cigars and golf club memberships. He said his client was willing to negotiate a settlement that would be favorable to both parties. I said I wanted to speak to my lawyer first, and he said that was wise. He also mentioned, almost casually, that his client's father had connections at several major financial firms in the region, and it would be unfortunate if those connections learned I was difficult to work with in the divorce proceedings. I said that sounded like a threat, and he said it was simply an observation. I hung up and called Angela immediately. She said not to worry about Kingsley's intimidation tactics and to let her handle all communication with him. I started looking for temporary work to cover my bills. The hotel was costing $120 a night, and my secret account was draining fast. I applied to retail positions, food service, anything that didn't require weeks of interview processes. I got hired at a sporting goods store the same day I applied, stocking shelves and working the register for $15 an hour. It was humbling, wearing a name tag and helping customers find running shoes, but it was money I earned without anyone's influence. My manager, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Nguyen, treated me like any other employee. She didn't know about Meridian or the Ashfords or my failed marriage. I was just another guy who needed work. I moved out of the hotel after 2 weeks and found a room to rent in someone's house on the other side of town. The room was small, barely bigger than the hotel, but it was $250 a month including utilities. My roommates were a rotating cast of people in transition like me. We shared a kitchen and bathroom and didn't ask each other personal questions. I worked at the sporting goods store 6 days a week and applied to professional jobs in the evenings. Angela kept me updated on the divorce proceedings. Olivia's lawyer was stalling on the asset disclosure, claiming they needed more time to compile documentation. The judge had given them an extension, but warned there would be consequences for continued delays. 3 months into the separation, I got a call from Horizon Capital. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Jennifer Walsh, Director of Human Resources. She said they'd seen my application in their system from months ago and noticed I was no longer at Meridian Financial. She asked if I'd be interested in interviewing for a new position they had open, Analytics Manager. It was similar to the role they'd offered before, but with a slightly different focus. The interview would be in 2 days if I was available. I said yes immediately. The interview went well. I met with Jennifer and the CEO, a man named David Cho. They asked about my experience at Meridian, and I kept my answers professional and focused on the work I'd actually done. David asked directly why I'd left, and I said I'd been looking for more autonomy and independence in my career. He nodded like that made sense. They didn't mention the Ashfords, and I didn't bring them up. I showed them a portfolio of projects I'd worked on, analysis I'd performed, strategies I'd developed, work product that was mine regardless of how I got the positions that let me create it. Jennifer said they'd be in touch within a week. Horizon offered me the job 3 days later. Analytics manager at $90,000 a year with full benefits and a performance bonus structure. It was less money than director of operations, but it was mine. No family connections, no puppet strings, just my work and my ability. I gave Patricia 2 weeks' notice at the sporting goods store, and she hugged me and said she knew I was going places. My first day at Horizon was both terrifying and liberating. I walked into an office where nobody knew me, where I had to prove myself from scratch. It felt like starting my career over, but this time, it was real. The divorce proceedings got ugly in month 4. Olivia's lawyer finally submitted asset disclosure, and Angela called me sounding furious. The documents showed that most of the money in our joint accounts had been gifts from Gregory Ashford to his daughter during our marriage. Olivia was claiming that $180,000 of the $230,000 was technically hers, because her father had given it to her directly, and I'd simply been allowed to benefit from it. Angela said this was nonsense, and that gifts to one spouse during marriage become marital property. But Olivia's lawyer had documentation showing deposits labeled as gifts, transfers with notations about family support, even a few handwritten cards from Gregory to Olivia mentioning money. They'd been planning this defense for months, maybe years. The judge ordered both sides to prepare for a hearing to determine which assets were separate versus marital property. Angela started gathering evidence showing that I'd contributed to the household, paid bills, made financial decisions jointly with Olivia. She subpoenaed bank records showing my paycheck deposits and how they'd been used for shared expenses. She pulled credit card statements showing purchases I'd made for the household. She documented every way I'd participated in our financial life together. She also filed a motion to have Gregory deposed, since he was claiming to have given substantial gifts to Olivia during our marriage. Olivia's lawyer fought that motion hard, claiming Gregory's finances were irrelevant. The judge disagreed and scheduled the deposition. Gregory Ashford showed up to his deposition with 2 lawyers and an attitude like he was doing everyone a favor by being there. Angela recorded the whole session. She asked Gregory about his net worth, his business holdings, his relationship with Meridian Financial. She asked about the $180,000 he'd allegedly given to Olivia. Gregory confirmed the gifts, said he'd wanted to ensure his daughter's security and comfort. Angela asked if he'd given me any gifts during the marriage. Gregory said no, because I wasn't his child. Angela asked if the money he'd given Olivia was intended for the marital household or exclusively for her. Gregory hesitated and said it was for Olivia to use as she saw fit. Angela asked if Gregory knew Olivia and I had a joint account where the money was deposited. Gregory said he assumed we did, since we were married. Angela pressed harder. She asked if Gregory had ever discussed his financial gifts with me directly. He said no. She asked if he'd ever required Olivia to keep the money separate from marital assets. He said he'd trusted her judgment. Angela asked if Gregory was aware that Olivia had transferred $225,000 out of the marital accounts immediately following our separation. Gregory's lawyers objected, claiming the question was argumentative. The court reporter noted the objection. Angela rephrased. She asked if Gregory was aware his daughter had moved significant marital funds without court approval. Gregory said he'd heard something about it. Angela asked if he'd advised her to do that. Gregory's lawyers objected again. This went on for 3 hours, and by the end, Angela had established that Gregory had given his daughter substantial money during our marriage, with no documentation requiring it to be kept separate, and that he'd had significant influence over my career advancement at Meridian. The hearing was scheduled for month 6 of the separation. Angela and I spent weeks preparing. She coached me on how to answer questions, how to stay calm under cross-examination, how to present myself as credible and sympathetic. We organized documents into binders, creating a timeline of our financial life together. She prepared exhibits showing my contributions to the household, my work performance at Meridian independent of Ashford influence, the money I'd earned through my own labor. She also prepared questions for Olivia about the night she'd publicly humiliated me, about her control over our finances, about her decision to move marital assets without permission. The hearing took place in a family court downtown. The judge was a woman named Barbara Constantine, who'd been on the bench for 20 years according to Angela's research. She had a reputation for being fair but tough, especially on parties who tried to hide assets or manipulate proceedings. I sat at a table next to Angela, and across the aisle, Olivia sat with Thomas Kingsley and her father. Olivia was dressed professionally, looking calm and composed. She didn't make eye contact with me. Judge Constantine started by addressing the asset dispute. She asked Olivia's lawyer to present evidence that the $180,000 in question constituted separate property. Thomas stood and presented the documentation. Deposit records, transfer receipts, greeting cards from Gregory to Olivia mentioning money. He argued that these were clear gifts from a father to his daughter, made during the marriage but intended for her exclusive benefit. He cited case law about separate property versus marital property. He said that just because Olivia had chosen to deposit the money into a joint account didn't transform it into marital property, because the intent behind the gifts remained separate. Angela cross-examined. She asked Thomas if he had any written agreements, signed by both parties, establishing these funds as separate property. He said no, but that such agreements weren't required under the law. Angela asked if Gregory had required Olivia to keep the money in a separate account. Thomas said no. Angela asked if there was any documentation showing I'd been informed these were separate gifts and not marital assets. Thomas said the burden wasn't on them to inform me. It was on me to prove the money was marital. Judge Constantine made notes and told Angela to proceed with her case. Angela called me to the stand first. She asked me to explain our financial arrangement during the marriage. I described how Olivia had taken over our finances early on, how all money went into joint accounts, how I'd contributed my entire paycheck to the household, how I'd believed all our money was shared. Angela showed me bank statements and asked if I recognized them. I confirmed they were our joint accounts and that I'd seen them regularly during the marriage. Angela asked if Olivia had ever told me that certain money in those accounts was hers exclusively. I said no. Angela asked if I'd made financial decisions based on the belief that all money in the joint accounts was marital property. I said yes. Angela asked me to give examples. I talked about how we'd use joint funds to pay for vacations, to renovate the house we rented, to buy furniture and cars and everything else. I explained that I'd never questioned whether some money was off limits, because Olivia had never indicated any was. Angela asked if I'd contributed to the accounts. I said yes, every paycheck for 8 years. Angela asked what happened when I tried to access our money after we separated. I explained how Olivia had transferred most of it away, leaving me with almost nothing. Angela asked how that made me feel. I said it made me feel like I'd been robbed and betrayed. Thomas cross-examined me. He asked if I'd ever explicitly asked Olivia whether her father's gifts were separate or marital property. I said I hadn't known they were gifts at the time. I'd thought they were just normal deposits. Thomas asked if I'd been aware of Gregory's financial support of our household. I said I'd been aware he was wealthy and generous, but I hadn't tracked which money came from where, because I'd trusted my wife to manage our finances honestly. Thomas asked if I'd enjoyed the benefits of Gregory's generosity. I said I'd enjoyed the benefits of our marital finances. Yes. Thomas smirked like he'd proven something. Angela called Olivia to the stand next. Olivia walked up looking confident, like this was a performance she'd rehearsed. Angela asked her about the night of the promotion party. Olivia described it as a miscommunication, said she'd been trying to celebrate my achievement and things had gotten out of hand. Angela asked if Olivia had announced to a room full of people that I hadn't earned my promotion. Olivia hesitated and said she'd been upset because I'd tried to leave Meridian without discussing it with her first. Angela asked if that gave her the right to publicly humiliate me. Thomas objected, claiming the question was argumentative. Judge Constantine sustained the objection. Angela changed approaches. She asked Olivia about our financial arrangement. Olivia confirmed that we'd had joint accounts and that she'd managed the finances. Angela asked why she'd chosen to manage everything instead of sharing responsibility. Olivia said she was better with money and I'd been happy to let her handle it. Angela asked if she'd ever discussed keeping certain assets separate. Olivia said no, because she hadn't thought it was necessary. Angela asked if Olivia had ever told me that the money her father gave her was exclusively hers. Olivia said she'd assumed I understood that gifts from her father were meant for her. Angela asked if she'd documented that assumption anywhere. Olivia said no. Angela asked about the money transfer after our separation. Olivia admitted she'd moved the funds to protect her assets. Angela asked if she'd consulted a lawyer first. Olivia said she'd consulted her father. Angela asked if Gregory was a lawyer. Olivia said no, but he was a businessman who understood finances. Angela asked if Olivia had considered that moving marital assets without court approval might be illegal. Thomas objected again. Judge Constantine overruled it and told Olivia to answer. Olivia said she'd been acting in the moment to protect herself. Angela asked what she'd needed protection from. Olivia said she'd been afraid I'd take everything and leave her with nothing. The testimony went on for hours. Angela presented witnesses, including Kevin from Meridian, who testified that everyone at the company knew about the Ashford family's influence over my career. She presented Patricia from the sporting goods store, who testified that I'd worked hard and been reliable during my time there, showing I was capable of holding a job without family connections. She presented Jennifer from Horizon Capital, who testified that they'd hired me based on my qualifications and work product, not based on any family connections. Each witness built a picture of who I was, separate from Olivia's narrative. Someone capable, hardworking, deserving of respect and independence. Thomas presented his own witnesses, colleagues from Meridian, who testified that Gregory Ashford's investment was crucial to the company, and that it was common knowledge the Ashford family had influence over personnel decisions. Friends of Olivia's who testified that she'd always been the more financially responsible one in our marriage, and that I'd been content to let her manage everything. Gregory himself, who testified that he'd given money to his daughter out of paternal love, and that he'd never intended those gifts to benefit me specifically. Each witness reinforced Olivia's position that I'd been a dependent, that my success was borrowed, that I had no claim to money Gregory had given to support his daughter. Judge Constantine took a week to make her decision. When we returned to court for the ruling, the courtroom was tense. I sat next to Angela, trying not to shake. Olivia sat across the aisle, looking calm. Judge Constantine read her decision from the bench. She said that while Gregory Ashford's gifts to his daughter during the marriage were documented, the lack of any written agreement establishing them as separate property, combined with their deposit into joint accounts and use for marital purposes, meant they constituted marital property. She ordered the $225,000 to be split evenly between us. She also ordered Olivia to pay my legal fees, since her unilateral transfer of funds had necessitated emergency court intervention. Olivia's face went red. Thomas immediately stood to object, but Judge Constantine cut him off. She said the law was clear, and if Gregory Ashford had wanted his gifts to remain separate, he should have documented that intent. The ruling stood. Angela reached over and squeezed my hand. I felt something lift off my chest that had been sitting there for months. Not victory exactly, but validation. Acknowledgement that I hadn't been crazy, that Olivia had been wrong, that I deserved equal treatment under the law. The final divorce decree came through 2 months later. The settlement split our remaining assets 50-50 after Olivia returned the transferred money. I walked away with about $120,000, half our savings and investments. It wasn't enough to buy a house, but it was enough to get an apartment and a car and start rebuilding. Olivia walked away with the same amount, plus whatever her father gave her afterward, which I'm sure was substantial. Gregory's lawyers had threatened to appeal the ruling, but Angela pointed out that appeals rarely succeeded in family court asset divisions, and the negative publicity would be worse than just accepting the judgment. They backed down. I'd been at Horizon Capital for 8 months when the divorce finalized. I'd gotten a performance review that was glowing. David had mentioned that they were considering creating a senior management position, and I should think about whether I'd be interested. I'd built a good relationship with my team, and I'd brought in 2 new clients through my own networking and analysis. I was succeeding, based on nothing but my own work. It felt surreal some days, like I was living someone else's life, but it was mine. I'd earned it. I ran into Kevin one Saturday at a coffee shop downtown. He was there with his wife, and when he saw me, he came over to say hello. He asked how I was doing, and I said honestly, better than I'd been in years. He said he'd heard about the divorce settlement and was glad things had worked out. Then he told me something I hadn't known. After I left Meridian, Richard had quietly pushed back against the Ashford family's involvement in personnel decisions. He'd argued that the company needed to maintain professional standards and couldn't be seen as selling positions to investors' relatives. Gregory had threatened to pull his investment, but the board had supported Richard. The company had survived without Ashford money, and they'd hired a new director of operations who was earning the role through actual performance. Kevin said morale had improved, and people were starting to feel like Meridian was a real company again, instead of Gregory's personal kingdom. I thanked Kevin for telling me that. It helped somehow, knowing that me leaving had maybe changed things for other people too. That my humiliation at the promotion party had exposed something toxic that was bigger than just my marriage. Kevin and I exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling lighter, like I'd finally closed a chapter I'd been stuck in for years. A year after the divorce, I got promoted to Senior Analytics Manager at Horizon. The promotion came with a $20,000 raise and more responsibility. When David called me into his office to tell me, I asked him directly if this was because of my performance or because of any outside influence. He looked confused and said it was entirely performance-based, that my work had impressed the board and they wanted to invest in my continued growth at the company. I thanked him and went back to my desk and sat there for a minute just breathing. This was real. This was mine. No one had bought it for me or manipulated things behind the scenes. I'd earned it. I bought myself a better watch to celebrate. Not as expensive as the one I'd bought before, but nicer than I needed. I wore it to work and looked at it sometimes during meetings, reminding myself that I could afford things now, that I had money I'd earned and saved and controlled, that no one could take it away from me or use it against me, that I was financially independent in a way I'd never been during my marriage. Some nights I still had dreams about the promotion party. I'd be standing in that conference room watching Olivia announce my inadequacy to everyone I worked with. I'd wake up sweating, feeling that same humiliation and helplessness. But then I'd remember how it ended, how I'd walked away, how I'd fought back, how I'd won, not because I destroyed Olivia, but because I'd freed myself. The dreams came less frequently as time passed. The sharp edges of that memory dulled into something I could look at without flinching. I started dating again eventually. Nothing serious at first, just casual dinners and movies with women I met through friends or dating apps. I was cautious, maybe overly so, about red flags. Any hint of someone wanting to control my finances or decisions sent me running. Angela had recommended a therapist who specialized in recovery from controlling relationships, and I'd been seeing her for months. Dr. Nina Blackwell helped me understand the patterns I'd fallen into with Olivia, the ways I'd enabled the control by not setting boundaries, the childhood experiences that made me vulnerable to someone like her. The therapy was hard work, forcing me to examine parts of myself I'd been avoiding, but it helped. I started to feel like a person with agency again, someone who could make choices and trust himself to make good ones. 2 years after the divorce, I met someone. Her name was Rachel, and she was a graphic designer who worked for herself. We met at a networking event for young professionals, and when we started talking, I realized I was relaxed in a way I hadn't been with anyone in years. Rachel was independent and confident, and when I told her on our third date about my divorce and what had happened, she listened without judgment. She said everyone had a past, and what mattered was who we were now and who we were becoming. We took things slow, building trust gradually. When we finally talked about moving in together, Rachel insisted we keep separate bank accounts and split expenses 50-50. She said she never wanted either of us to feel financially trapped or dependent. I almost cried with relief when she said that. I never saw Olivia again after the divorce was finalized. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd married someone new, another man who worked in finance and whose family had money. I hoped she was happy, but I didn't spend much time thinking about it. That part of my life was over, and I'd built something new, something better, something that belonged entirely to me. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.